Have you ever seen a dead body? This was the question that Carly Gregg asked her friend after shooting her mother. This may seem horrendous and unimaginable, and it is. Yet when you take a deeper look at Carly and what was going on with her mental health, it makes more sense. Let's break it down. Carly's parents were divorced, and although this happens often in our culture, it can have devastating consequences for some people. For Carly, it seems to have had devastating consequences. Carly had started to also experiment with substance use and was keeping it secret from her parents. She had paraphernalia. She had burner phones. She was leading a secret life that her parents had no idea about. This also happens often in our culture. Yet for Carly, it would have had more of an impact on her, and those who knew her would never have expected the outcome that came from this event. Now, what we know about substance use is that when substances are used, the frontal cortex, the part of the brain that makes us uniquely us, our moral reasoning, all of those pieces, shuts down. It turns off and doesn't process as it used to. And when you couple that with the frontal cortex not being fully developed with Carly, it can have devastating impact on the decisions that she would make, or that youth make, or even as adults we make. When the frontal cortex is interrupted and not able to process, our core values are no longer relevant. Our core values are what keeps us on the straight and narrow and processing things through so that we have a better chance of making decisions that are going to be more beneficial instead of detrimental to us. When we do things and we say things that we wouldn't normally do or say when we're using substances, it's most likely because our frontal cortex has shut down and it's no longer processing. It's no longer allowing information to filter through and do what it typically does for us. Now, it's when we look at like the frontal cortex and the ability that we have to reason through things, and when we look at our core value system, most of us have a set of core values that we have been taught from our parents, from our significant people in our life that play a role in our development. When we use our core value system to make decisions, we make better decisions typically than when we're just going by the seat of our pants, right? Flying by the seat of our pants. And then when substance use comes into play and the frontal cortex shuts down, it wipes that away, and we now make decisions based on totally different reasons. It also has to do with the midbrain, where the substance use resides, right? That's the pleasure center, the midbrain, where it actually changes from a want to a need when we have the addict gene, or when we've used enough that our brain functions saying that we need it to survive. So to make matters worse, when we start using our frontal cortex is no longer activated, we start to disconnect from those that love us, from those that are helpful with helping us make better choices and rationally looking at things. And we tend to seek out people that are doing the same kind of things we are, which if you put two people together that their frontal cortexes are not engaged and not working, how good do you think their reasoning is going to be when they're making decisions? So we tend to move away from and disconnect from those we love. We isolate ourselves. We start making decisions, changing our family, changing our friends, interactions. We start going to different places that we typically wouldn't associate with those people if we weren't using substances. So we then interact with people that are doing the same thing that we're doing, typically with somebody that is using substances as well. And a lot of times that would be like our dealers. Sometimes we start dealing so that we don't have to lie, cheat, or steal to use those substances. Again, our midbrain has deemed this as a need, not a want. So the way that we interact with people is totally different. In Carly's case, she also had other factors that were interfering with her decision making. One of which was her need to be liked and approved of by those people that she was surrounding herself with. Being the big girl on campus, right? Or doing or saying things to get approval for how she was acting or interacting, being tough, being brave, being the bad girl, whatever that looked like. She needed that approval from other people. And that may have been why she had asked the question about seeing the dead body to her friend. This was also reinforced with her friend actually coming over to see her mom and see the body, which I found interesting that it never said that the friend reached out and called the police or let anybody else know that the mom had been killed. And I don't know if I just didn't see that in the story or if they just didn't mention it, but they did mention that the friend came over and saw the body. So I thought that was very interesting, and it actually reinforced to Carly that she had made the right choice because now she had somebody that approved of what she had done. Also, because of the frontal cortex was not working, Carly didn't look at the facts of the death as being permanent. She was only looking at it as solving her problem. And the problem that she saw was that her parents were going to find out about her secret life and that they would know she was using drugs and she was going to be in trouble. So in order to not be in trouble and to get out of the consequences that she could see happening, her brain came up with a solution. And that solution was that her parents must die, and then she wouldn't be in trouble. And most of the time we don't reason through, because the frontal cortex isn't working, that is a permanent solution, and death is death, and it's not going to, they can't come back from that. Now, for those of you that know little about the frontal cortex and how it works, it takes 100 days of not using a substance for your frontal cortex to start working again and start processing. So that means that after 100 days, she would then have her frontal cortex start being able to have that moral reasoning come back into play, and that she would actually then start looking at her actions and behaviors from her value system. So what that means is that after that 100 days, Carly's reaction to what she's done is going to be a lot more difficult, and she's going to have a lot of shame and guilt. And there's going to be a lot more work mental health wise to healing once she's actually been able to start looking at the situation from her moral compass, and her frontal cortex. And her mental health, she'll actually have to do a lot more work on healing and taking responsibility for her actions once her frontal cortex is re-engaged, which by now unless she's continually using while incarcerated, which is a probability and a possibility, because we do know that drugs and substances are transferred into facilities on a regular basis, she's more likely than not having a lot of reactivity because of her actions and behaviors. Unfortunately for her, she's going to spend a lot of years incarcerated and processing what her behaviors and her actions were because of her inability to formulate a different outcome than what she was able to do with her frontal cortex shut down. Now, I'm sure there are more factors involved with her mental health than what we know about, and what they and what they've shared about her story. There has to be a lot more involved than we are aware of. We only get a snippet of information, but we do know that they were such strong influences on the decisions that she was able to make leading up to the event of shooting her mother, and also then calling her stepfather from her mother's phone and luring him home to shoot him as well. Luckily in that aspect, we actually get to see that he's alive and that she doesn't have that much more on her plate to work through. It is important to note that I am not negating her responsibility in this shooting. I am simply shining a light on the other factors which led to the events occurring in the first place. Now, as a society, we want to believe that marijuana is not dangerous. She was using marijuana. We don't want to look at it as being dangerous or deadly, and we have legalized it and have looked at all the medicinal values that marijuana can provide. Now, research, though, shows that with long-term marijuana use, we have a greater chance of having psychoses than with any other substances or many other substances. And if you think about it this way, marijuana right now is being laced with a lot of different chemicals. It's a lot of times you'll find fentanyl in it, you'll find methamphetamine in it, you will find MDMA in it, you will find a lot of different substances added into marijuana to hook that person into seeking it out from the person that they got it from. Because if you think about it this way, since we have legalized marijuana in a lot of states, we have taken money out of the pockets of dealers and instead put the monies in the dispensaries, right? So to get their money back, to increase their profit line, dealers have started to include other substances, which hooks you even more, and you come back again and again and again to that same dealer to get your marijuana. So the reality is, we want to talk about how important it is to look at the long-term ramifications for our youth. Again, I'm not talking about marijuana from dispensaries. I'm not talking about the medicinal purposes and uses for marijuana. We are learning how to use that in a healthy and productive way for people that are not addicts. Now, that's another big story for another time, what we can talk about addicts and the medicinal uses that we are looking at for some substances. But today we're just focusing on youth and these two cases in particular. So One of the things that I really want you to think about is, if we don't stop the substance use with our youth, we won't have any youth anymore. Our youth are dying at an alarming rate. They're getting hooked into all of these deadly drugs and dying at a rate that we haven't seen in the past before. So now let's turn our attention from Carly to Colt. Now Carly, before we do that, Carly was 15 when this happened. Colt was 14. Colt Gregg, the 14-year-old who was the shooter at Appalachian High School in Winder, Georgia. This happened the first part of September, and we are still learning so much more information about what happened and the situation with both of his parents being involved, and we're learning more about the events and the mental health that has taken place within the structure of this family. Right now, we know that both of his parents have been incarcerated as well. Dad has been incarcerated for giving him the rifle, which he used to shoot people, and Mom has been incarcerated for elder abuse, which took place last year, and she's incarcerated this year for it. We also know that there are so many different factors into the mental health angles with Colt and the issues with mental illness and mental health in their family. Again, we have a family that the parents got divorced, which increases the likelihood that something's going to happen detrimentally or emotionally with the children. Not always. So we have to make sure that we're distinguishing that just because you're getting divorced, just because your family has discord like Colt's family had, doesn't mean that you're going to have a child that's going to shoot you, shoot other people, or harm themselves or do something else destructive. It is a factor and something that we have to look at, though. We also have to look at the fact that Colt's mom has a history of incarceration, which also increases the likelihood that Colt would have mental distress. The parents not getting along, him living, going back and forth between family, would create that mental distress. Mom did, however, try to warn the school from a text Colt sent to his parents telling them that he was sorry. I actually have to think, though, and I might be assuming something in this, but I assume that she believed that he was going to harm himself and not do what he did with shooting other people. However, I may be really wrong in that assumption, and Mom may have believed that what was going to take place was really what did take place, because Mom also did warn the school or warn authorities a few days or a few weeks before that event that Colt was in need of some mental help, and he didn't receive it. So now let's look at why it's so important to teach emotional intelligence to children. If you think about it this way, as adults, we don't have the emotional skills necessary to manage or maintain well-being all the time. So it goes without saying that our children would not have the skills needed either. We have not been taught that emotions are safe and or that they are actually an information system that helps us know that we need to do something, we need to pay attention to something. So what would it be like if we were to change that, and if we took more time and more attention in teaching an approach to our children about emotional intelligence when they were really young? What would change? What would help if we actually helped them learn how to emote in healthy ways? If we actually took the time to help them identify what they were feeling in the moment, instead of pushing it away, calling them names, getting irritated or frustrated, or walking away, We need to do better with this. And we can do better than this. One way I've decided to help is to offer, I've just created an emotional growth course that is available. You can find it on my website, pathwaytoempowerment.com. I also would love to create a curriculum to implement in schools so that we could start early. We could start when they were in preschool so that children came to understand that emotions happen every 90 seconds and that they are okay to have, that we need emotions. We need to know how to work with emotions on a healthy, regular basis so that we know what to do next when we have situations that come up where we're bullied, where we're told things that aren't helpful, that they're hurtful and harmful, that we don't internalize them like we've had happen for decades, right? I also really believe that we need to have open forums to discuss the problematic thoughts which stem from feelings, which turn to behaviors, right? And usually these behaviors often have really devastating outcomes and consequences to not only the person, the family, but throughout our society, throughout the world. So let's start being the change. Help me spread this message, which this message can actually be a message of hope if we actually start implementing things and working together to make this a normalized thing that we feel, we emote, we get help, we learn. We can work together to do this. So I'm imploring you to please comment, like, and share, and let's be the change for these children. Let's help our society as a whole be better and do better. I look forward to hearing your comments, and please go to my website, look up the course, let me know how I can help. If there's people that you know that we can get in front of so that we can find out how to implement a curriculum in schools, I would love to be of help that way. Let's work on this together.